The Hebrew term shechitah, also transliterated shehitah, shechitah, shehita, means the slaughtering of certain mammals and birds for food according to Jewish dietary laws. Biblical source: the Torah states that sheep and cattle should be slaughtered, as I have instructed you, but nowhere in the 5 books of Moses are any of the practices of shechitah described. Instead, they have been handed down in Judaism's traditional oral Torah, and codified in halakha. Species: the animal must be of a permitted species. For mammals, this is restricted to ruminants which have split hooves. For birds, although biblically any species of bird not specifically excluded in Deuteronomy chapter 14 verses 12 to 18 would be permitted, doubts as to the identity and scope of the species on the biblical list led to rabbinical law permitting only birds with a tradition of being permissible. Procedure: the procedure, which must be performed by a shechitah, involves severing the trachea, esophagus, carotid arteries, jugular veins and vagus nerve in a swift action using a special knife with an extremely sharp blade. This is done with the intention of causing a rapid drop in blood pressure in the brain and loss of consciousness, to render the animal insensitive to pain and to exsanguinate in a prompt and precise action. The procedure may be performed with the animal either lying on its back or standing. To fulfill the basic law of shechitah, the majority of both the trachea and esophagus of a mammal, or the majority of either one of these in the case of birds, must be incised with a back and forth motion without violating one of the 5 major prohibited techniques, or various other detailed rules. Forbidden techniques: shehitah, a pause or hesitation during the incision of even a moment makes the animal's flesh unkosher. The knife must move in an uninterrupted sweep. Shehitah occurs if the shechitah accidentally stops the slaughtering process after either the trachea or esophagus has been cut, but before they have been cut the majority of the way through. Pausing can happen accidentally if muscle contractions in the animal's neck pull one of these organs out of contact with the blade. The latter case is especially common in turkeys. Derazer, the knife must be drawn across the throat by forward-backward movements, not by hacking or pressing. Any undue pressure renders the animal unkosher. Derazer is the forbidden action that occurs when the shechitah pushes the knife into the animal's throat without moving it back and forth, chops rather than slices, or positions the animal improperly so that either its head presses down on the blade as it expires or the shechitah must push the knife into the throat, against the force of gravity. There are those who opine that it is forbidden to have the animal in an upright position during shechitah due to the prohibition of derazer. They maintain that the animal must be on its back, lying on its side, suspended upside down by a rope or chain, or placed in a barrel-like pen that turns the animal on its back for slaughter. However, the Orthodox Union accepts upright slaughter as long as the head is properly supported, and today all cattle processing facilities in the U.S., except for the agri-processors plant in Iowa, use upright slaughter pens. South American kosher abattoirs primarily use the rotating pen, shackle and hoist, as well as shackle and drag methods of slaughter. Haladah, the knife must be drawn over the throat so that it is visible while shechitah is being performed. It must not be stabbed into the neck or buried by fur, hide, or feathers in the case of a bird. Haladah occurs if the shechitah either accidentally cuts into the animal's throat so deeply that the entire width of the knife disappears in the wound, uses a knife that is too short so that the end disappears in the wound, or if a foreign object falls over the knife so the shechitah loses sight of the incision. Hagramoth, the limits within which the knife may be applied are from the large ring in the windpipe to the top of the upper lobe of the lung when it is inflated, and corresponding to the length of the pharynx. Slaughtering above or below these limits renders the meat unkosher. Işkar, if either the esophagus or the trachea is torn during the shechitah incision, the carcass is rendered unkosher and cannot be eaten by Jews. Işkar occurs if the shechitah accidentally uses a chalif with an imperfection on the blade, such as a scratch or nick, that causes a section of blade to be lower than the surface of the blade. Breaching any of these 5 rules renders the animal nevela. The animal is regarded in Jewish law as if it were carrion. Temple Grandin has stated that she has observed that if the rules are disobeyed, the animal will struggle. If these rules are obeyed, the animal has little reaction. The knife used for shechitah is called a halif by Ashkenazim or a second by all Jews. By biblical law, the knife may be made from anything not attached directly or indirectly to the ground and capable of being sharpened and polished to the necessary level of sharpness and smoothness required for shechitah. The minhag now is to use a metal knife. The knife must be minimally slightly longer than the neck, but preferably at least 2 times as long as the animal's neck is wide, but not so long that the weight of the knife is deemed excessive. If the knife is too large, it is assumed to cause dirazor, excessive pressing. Kosher knife makers sell knives of differing sizes depending on the animal. Shorter blades may technically be used depending on the number of strokes employed to slaughter the animal, but the normative practice today is that shorter blades are not used. The knife must not have a point. It is feared a point may slip into the wound during slaughter and cause haladah, covering, of the blade. The blade may also not be serrated, as serrations cause ikkur, tearing. The blade may not have imperfections in it. All blades are assumed by Jewish law to be imperfect, so the knife must be checked before each session. In the past, the knife was checked through a variety of means. Today the common practice is for the shochet to run his fingernail up and down both sides of the blade and on the cutting edge to determine if he can feel any imperfections. He then uses a number of increasingly fine abrasive stones to sharpen and polish the blade until it is perfectly sharp and smooth. After the slaughter, the shochet must check the knife again in the same way to be certain the first inspection was properly done, and to ensure the blade was not damaged during shechitah. If the blade is found to be damaged, the meat may not be eaten by Jews. If the blade falls or is lost before the second check is done, the first inspection is relied on and the meat is permitted. In previous centuries the halif was made of forged steel, which was not reflective and was difficult to make both smooth and sharp. The Alter Rebbe, fearing that Sabbatians were scratching the knives in a way not detectable by normal people, introduced the Hasidisha halif. The Hasidisha halif differs from the previously used knife in that it was made from molten steel and polished to a mirror gloss in which scratches could be seen as well as felt. The new knife was controversial and one of the reasons for the 1772 excommunications of the Chassidim. Today the Hasidisha halif is the only commercially available knife for shechitah and is universally accepted. Other rules. The animal may not be stunned prior to the procedure, as is common practice in non-kosher modern animal slaughter since the first half of the 20th century. It is forbidden to slaughter an animal and its young on the same day. An animal's young is defined as either its own offspring, or another animal that follows it around, even if of another species. The animal's blood may not be collected in a bowl, a pit, or a body of water, as these resemble ancient forms of idol worship. If the shochet accidentally slaughters with a knife dedicated to idol worship, he must remove an amount of meat equivalent to the value of the knife and destroy it. If he slaughtered with such a knife on purpose, the animal is forbidden as not kosher. Post-procedure requirements. The carcass must be checked to see if the animal had any of a specific list of internal injuries that would have rendered the animal a treifa before the slaughter. These injuries were established by the Talmudist rabbis as being likely to cause the animal to die within 12 months' time. Today all mammals are inspected for lung adhesions and other disqualifying signs of the lungs, and most kosher birds will have their intestines inspected for infections. Further inspection of other parts of the body may be performed depending on the stringency applied and also depending on if any signs of sickness were detected before slaughter or during the processing of the animal. Glatt, or halik in Hebrew, means smooth in German and Yiddish. In the context of kosher meat, it refers to the smoothness, or lack of blemish, in the internal organs of the animal. In the case of an adhesion on a cow's lungs specifically, there is debate between Ashkenazi customs and Sephardic customs. While there are certain areas of the lung where an adhesion is allowed, the debate revolves around adhesions which do not occur in these areas. Ashkenazi Jews rule that if the adhesion can be removed and the lungs are still airtight, then the animal is still kosher, while Sephardic Jews rule that if there is any sort of adhesion on the forbidden areas of the lungs, then the animal is not kosher. Nikur purging refers to the halakhic requirement to remove the carcass's veins, chelev and sinews. The Torah prohibits the eating of certain fats and organs, such as the kidneys and intestines, so they must be removed from the animal. These fats are typically known as chelev. There is also a biblical prohibition against eating the sciatic nerve, so that, too, is removed. The removal of the chelev and the gid hanasher, called nikur, is considered complicated and tedious, and hence labor-intensive, and even more specialized training is necessary to perform the act properly. While the small amounts of chelev in the front half of the animal are relatively easy to remove, the back half of the animal is far more complicated, and it is where the sciatic nerve is located. In countries such as the United States, where there exists a large non-kosher meat market, the hindquarters of the animal is often sold to non-Jews, rather than trouble with the process. This tradition goes back for centuries, where local Muslims accept meat slaughtered by Jews as consumable. However, the custom was not universal throughout the Muslim world, and some Muslims did not accept these hindquarters as halal. In Israel, on the other hand, specially trained men are hired to prepare the hindquarters for sale as kosher. Blood removal. Because of the biblical prohibition of eating blood, all blood must be promptly removed from the carcass. All large arteries and veins are removed, as well as any bruised meat or coagulated blood. Then the meat is kashered, a process of soaking and salting the meat to draw out all the blood. If this procedure is not performed promptly, the blood is considered to have set in the meat, and the meat is no longer salvageable to eat except when prepared through broiling with appropriate drainage. Giving of the gifts. The shoshay is biblically commanded to give the foreleg, cheeks, and a bomasum to a Kohen, this even though he does not own the meat. Thus, it is desirable that the shoshay refuse to perform the shechitah unless the animal's owner expresses his agreement to give the gifts. Rabbinical courts have the authority to excommunicate a shoshay who refuses to perform this commandment. The Rishonim point out the shoshay cannot claim that, since the animal does not belong to him, he cannot give the gifts without the owner's consent. On the contrary, since the average shoshay is reputed to be well-versed and knowledgeable in the laws of shechitah, Beth Din relies on him to withhold his shechitah so long as the owner refuses to give the gifts. The obligation of giving the gifts lay upon the shoshay to separate the parts due to the Kohanim. Apparently, the reasoning is that since the average shoshay is a friend, since he completed the prerequisite of understanding the laws of shechitah and bedikah, it is assumed that he as well is knowledgeable in the details of the laws of giving the gifts, and will not put the mitzvah aside.